Hello, project people, and welcome back to another episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's amazing to be here for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Val isn't here, Martin.
Always a bonus.
Yeah, always a bonus. Val couldn't make it because we're in London. We're live. We're with Mr. Colin D Ellis. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
Thank you, Dale. I'm great. Thank you.
Fantastic. And also, we do have a live audience.
We have a live audience. Yeah, I mean, people can't see they're mainly eating cake.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Shout
But
out
we
to
didn't supply to bribe them to come in here.
No
They
bribery required. But we do have a drink in hand, which is great. There's cake in the background. Happy birthday to Dee in the background in the audience there as well. So we're celebrating all the way around. It's great to see you, Colin.
Thank you.
It's been a little while since we've last seen you. But yeah, tell us, what have you been up to?
Mainly writing and kind of consulting in the culture space, Dale. It's been since I last saw you, which was a couple of years ago. It has just been so hectic. I think coming out of COVID, what most organizations realized is they're trying to find this kind of hybrid, flexible sweet spot. And there's been a widespread recognition, certainly from forward-thinking organizations, that we kind of have to reset the culture in order to work in the way that we want to work. We can't just automatically shift from, everyone's remote, let's bring people back into the office. So, for me, there's been a lot of work in that space, certainly with some big clients, helping them kind of globally, but also seeing how the media has really taken an interest in workplace culture. I talk about the fact that culture used to be a black box. It was something that you never really heard about. It's something you never really found out about. Like the way that people worked was something that you shared over a pint. It's like, don't work there, or how do I get a job there? Whereas now the media are taking a really big interest into how companies treat people.
Yep.
And so, we'll talk a little bit about the new book, but I really felt, kind of a responsibility, like, here's how you build great culture, but here's how you avoid the conditions for toxic culture. And so, kind of the last 18 months has been spent writing, researching, and then the book was published early this month.
No, that's awesome to hear, because not only is it about cultures, but I'm sure something that feeds heavily into that is well-being, mental, physical well-being, and how that all translates into performance as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of areas that we can uncover with that too. But in terms of toxic cultures or detoxing your culture, I don't know really where to start with this, because different organizations will be on different journeys. I guess the first place to start is, do all cultures need detoxifying?
Well, I think so. I think what they need to do is to make sure they mitigate the risk of toxic culture, whatever that means for their organization. And I always say that any organization can achieve this sense of vibrant culture, can build a workplace that everybody wants to be a part of. But they have to choose to do it. Culture is something that you choose to build, right? Most organizations will not do anything. So their choice is, we'll just cross our fingers and hope for it to happen. So every workplace is ever so slightly different. The kind of pillars of culture are the same. But if you don't actively mitigate the risk of toxic culture, then there's a very good chance that someone will get burned out, someone will be bullied, someone will be harassed. And then you've got the real extremes, which is the stuff that makes the media. And so I always say every senior leadership team should be mindful of the risk of toxic culture, because it's the biggest risk. Here in the UK, we had the Confederation of British Industry, which almost went bust because of a toxic culture. That was it. The actual products that they provided and the service they provided was fine, but their toxic culture meant that companies just were like, we're not giving you any more of our money. We don't want to be part of what you're part of. And so every organization does need to take steps to mitigate it. You mentioned well-being, and this is often where people go, we'll create a well-being program, which is great. Like, we're on course to spend between 40 to 60 billion US dollars on well-being programs this year. And yet none of them actually look at the root cause. We've got too much work. We've got too many dickheads in management positions, not here, obviously. But these are the kind of root causes. Instead, what we're doing is trying to fix, kind of the problem at the end rather than solving the root cause. Yeah.
How do you define toxic culture, just out of interest?
Well, and there's different ways of doing it, Martin. Just because someone says it's toxic doesn't necessarily mean that it is toxic. But you've kind of got the real low-level things, which is poor communication, micromanagement, overwork, an expectation that you're always on. up to the extremes, which is physical violence, sexual violence, all of those kinds of things. So you've got these, I talk about the fact that you've got different levels. There are 3 levels. The first level is a consistently combatant culture. And a consistently combatant culture is where everything's a fight. Everything's a battle. Now we have days like that where it just feels hard to do our job. And we're like, geez, God, will this day ever end? But if every day is like that, essentially what you're doing is sowing the seeds for toxicity. Then the next level is corrosive. And at corrosive, what you've done is we've normalized some behavior where all of a sudden Colin talked to you in a particular way, which was never right. And we explained that he's stressed or whatever. But actually, it's starting to harm you kind of emotionally. And then by the time you get to harmful, then it's physical harm, you're off sick. There's, there's literally, you're having to go to the doctor to get signed off. You're on top, and you might even get investigated by the police. And those are the 3 levels. I think toxic for most people is corrosive. Okay. Very, very rarely do you get to harmful, and those are the cases that generally make it into the media.
I was at a conference yesterday, and they brought up an interesting stat in construction that construction workers are 4 times more likely than any other industry to take their own lives through suicide. Is that a symptom of a toxic culture? Because it feels to me like it's heavily, heavily placed around those pressures you spoke about, those demands, those being overworked, not looking after individuals. Is it directly linked?
It can be, Dale. It can. It's very hard to say with any degree of accuracy that it's 100% linked. What I would say, having worked with construction companies, with engineering companies, is men are less likely, and these are heavily male dominated generally, right? Men are less likely to talk about their emotions to other men. And that's something that forward-thinking organizations are changing. I work with one engineering organization, and literally part of the cultural refresh, we kind of gave men permission to talk about how they felt. It was okay because, for the best part of 100 years in those kind of industries, it's a weakness.
Yeah.
You talk about when I first started work in the mid 80s, that's how old I am. My dad said to me, don't show your emotion in work. You weren't allowed to be emotional. If your boss gives you a crack, then you deserved it. These are the kind of things that we taught people. So I think it can be a symptom of toxic culture. But also, I think what we need is to really help organizations, part of that risk mitigation, to help employees to talk to each other about how they feel. That really stems from actually involving them in the definition of what great culture looks like. It doesn't matter whether you're a project team or a kind of multinational organization. What does great culture look like? Involve people in it, and then how do we talk about it and maintain it?
So I want to get into how we create that and maintain it in a second. But you spoke a lot around mitigating the risk of toxic cultures. For the risk professionals that listen to this podcast, are you suggesting we have a risk register with actual reviews on what, constitutes or contributes to toxic cultures and actively have those mitigation action plans in place? How sort of formal do you get with this?
Very formal. It's the biggest risk for every organization. It's the biggest risk for this organization, every organization. Because what happens in a toxic culture is we stop working. We're just like, I can't go into the office today because usually there's an individual who's creating toxicity, or there's just something happening within the organizations. And when people don't come to work, well, it's undermining productivity. If they then leak it to the press, reputation is damaged, leadership reputation is damaged. As a company, you can just collapse and fold and all of these things. You won't be able to hire people. You only have to look, I spoke to Gen Z employee about 3 weeks ago. And I asked her, I said, when you're applying for a job, what do you do? She said, I go to Glassdoor and have a look at their score. She said, anything below 4, no thanks. Because, of course, we're bringing our children up differently. We're bringing them up to want better for themselves. And so it should be the number one line on everyone's risk register. And yeah, it's not. It's always an afterthought.
Yeah,
Dale, because we're still not at that point educationally. And I worked with a company recently. They're like, oh, I love the way you provoke people. I'm like, I'm just trying to provoke them into action that they need to take in order to create the kind of place that produces great work so they can achieve their results. Who doesn't want that?
And you mentioned there that you may have an individual. So let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's say you've got one individual. And we've spoken about this previously on the podcast, where really toxic individuals can be like a bad cancer and spread throughout the organization. Right. So those listening to this episode going, actually, I have one of those people. what hints, tips, advice would you give to go, actually, this is your mitigation plan? Do you totally get rid of the person? Are they redeemable? What's the tack?
In my experience, I think once you've given somebody one chance to change and they don't, after that, it's not irredeemable, and you have to kind of follow the process to manage them out. Most organizations make it too hard to manage out poorly behaving, poorly performing employees. I said to a manager a couple of weeks ago, as a management team, you're only as good as your worst behaving employee. And it's really important that, you know, I always say that the first thing that we do when we've got someone who's badly behaving is we treat them with empathy, because we don't quite know often what's going on in the background. And as someone who was a manager myself for the best part of 15 years, I've definitely had that, where it's just like, hey, this is our character, Colin, you know, is there anything going on that I need to know about? But then you have to set expectations really clearly around behavior and performance, because if they don't behave or perform in the way that you expect, it's going to bring everybody down.
Yeah.
Not just them, not just their team. It's going to bring everyone down, because you're going to be saying, well, why is Colin giving Martin special, you know, kind of treatment when actually he's the root cause of the problem? I'm not saying you are, Martin. yeah. I got the emails. So, you know, but why are we giving them special treatment? We just, some organizations, for whatever reason, make excuses rather than being, hang on a minute, this is the culture we've defined, which is often the root cause because they don't really define it. Here's the culture we've defined. That behavior doesn't fit in. Therefore, you don't belong here, and you actively manage them out. You don't pay them off. You see this all the time. You know, you have to look at the UK Post Office. Some people who were involved in that scandal still have jobs in the post office.
Yeah.
I'm like, how are they still on the payroll?
Yeah.
They were complicit in what happened to those sub postmasters, right? And for me, if there's no jeopardy, there's no accountability. There's got to be a fear that if I don't behave or perform in the way that's expected of me, then I could lose my job. And so I want to bring my best self to work. And so I think that jeopardy is really, really important. And people have got to know that there's a certain standard that we aspire to. And if you don't hit that standard, then they can expect a compensation.
If we go back a step, you mentioned Jen said earlier, so we're currently in the season where new graduates are coming into the workplace for the first time. They have no idea about cultures. You know, they might look at Glassdoor, but, you know, we were all newbies once. We probably didn't get a good idea of what a toxic culture was or what a toxic manager was, probably till we were in our 30s. Is that fair? What are the tips and tricks that you would say to identify what is a toxic culture within an organization? And what would be your advice to those fresh-faced graduates in that organization about challenging it?
Well, I think, Martin, certainly from what I've seen and anecdotally from the people that I've spoken to, is they have an awareness of it only through listening to their parents. There was a report in New Zealand on Tuesday, so a couple of days ago, where two of the big four companies are actually reducing their headcounts because people just don't need advisory services anymore. Because what we've got is millennial managers now who've heard their parents badmouth consulting companies for years, and they're like, we're not going to go down that path. So they've heard their parents talk about cultures. But from a, you know, and I've got two teenagers, what I'm saying to my kids and what parents are saying to their children now is, don't walk and stay somewhere where they don't treat you in the right way. You know, you want to find somewhere that has values that match yours. You want to find somewhere that has purpose. And so what the research shows is that when Gen Z and millennials don't find a workplace with purpose and with strong values, the average tenure is just over 2.5 years, right? But if they're part of the culture definition, if they see positive evolution, then they're loyal for 5+ years. Now, we know, given the experience that we've got, is loyalty breeds consistency. Is you're going to get better results if you've got people who want to stay there, want to develop, want to grow, want to contribute. And so, you know, the emphasis now is on organizations to kind of get with the program a little bit. You know, I'm Gen X. And there's still managers who still don't get it. They're like, right, we're just going to tell everyone to come back to the office 5 days a week. It's like, well, that'll work. You've got to involve staff in that process and talk about, well, what does the evolution of work look like? What's important? You know, because we now talk to our children as if they're friends and adults. And so the expectation is they'll be involved when they get into the workplace too.
So you mentioned purpose, and you also mentioned vision in your book. So we'll treat those two things very separately. how can companies effectively generate a purpose? And I'm thinking about when it's being established, or maybe a purpose or vision statement, how democratically do you make that decision as an organization? Does it need to come from the top? Do you involve particular individuals? Do you try and get a consensus? What do the good companies do?
Well, the good companies, the senior leadership team are really involved in setting the purpose. I think that's their role. Is, a purpose is basically a statement of the good that you want to do, either in the world or in the country, whatever, kind of you choose your area to be. So that really comes from the leadership team. And then a vision is part of your strategy. Your vision is, here's our aspiration for the next generally 3 years in order to achieve or contribute to this purpose. So your purpose is really a really big statement. And the companies that are purpose driven make sure that every decision that they make lines up with the vision. So here's what we're going to achieve in the next 3 years, which contributes to the purpose. The vision actually is multi-layered, because what's often not well understood is that you can't have one culture and apply it to the entire company unless it's a company of around about 20 people, right? About 20 people, 25 people, you can have one culture. After that, you've got too many subcultures, right? You've got different people doing things in slightly different ways. And you've got to have a kind of, for me, it's like a backbone. Your purpose is the head. That's the brains. That's what we're heading towards. And then your kind of spine is your values, right? You might have a vision from an organization's perspective. That's fine. But if I'm running a project, I might have my own vision for my own project, as long as it contributes to the company's vision. So you've got all of these connection points, but everything leads to the purpose. Now, if you don't have a purpose, then a vision is fine. Yeah, you've still got to have a sense of aspiration. Otherwise, what gets people excited? And, I always say a good vision statement. I worked on one with a company in Germany last week. 6 words. 6 words, because you can remember it. You can remember it. It's powerful. You're like, yes, we know it. As soon as I say to people, what's your vision statement? If they can't tell me, I'm like, it's rubbish.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a good litmus test, that actually.
Yeah.
What is it? Does everyone know it? And what are the goals of the company? Can you say what it is? And if you make it too complex, I guess that's where you lose people along the way. But So too many people, what they try and do is be smart with their vision statement. Look how smart we are. Whereas actually what employees want is something that will light a fire inside them. And I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but they want to look at the vision statement and go, yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I want to work for a company that has that aspiration. Yeah. And I think, we have got into a world where we do make things too complex. I mean, we have to go down the whole project delivery profession and industry to just see some examples of how complex things can be. And when governments descope big things like HS2, we know we've gone too far.
Oh, God.
But we won't go down the rabbit hole. I think for me, if I bring it back as well, a lot of what you're talking about is sort of, for me, the thing that binds, and correct me or challenge me on this if you feel differently, the thing that binds people together, that creates a culture, are stories, information, things that are written down, an identity of who they are. And recently, I've been reading Yuval Harari's latest book, Nexus. And he's talking there, where I'm currently at, he's talking about, sort of truth versus order, and where truth doesn't always equate to order. And that balance, because we're seeing where we've got a generation that wants truth, that wants to understand full transparency and the facts and everything like that. But for an organization or project to be delivered successfully, you kind of need order with that. And the two don't always coexist. And that also leads into culture, because we've all seen the project delivery manager, project director giving a certain direction. And it might not seem logical because there's no facts behind it. It might seem radical. It might seem crazy. But they have the reason, because they want to maintain order, because all the evidence suggests otherwise. How do those working on projects reconcile truth and order, specifically in a cultural context? Because the culture actually drives that organization or project to success. And so a large part of that is the information and the various ways we either verbalize it or write it down, or whatever the case might be.
So I think the first thing, anyone who's involved in projects, particularly project managers, project directors, what they need to know is they have agency over their own culture. Mm-hmm. I think often they don't make that part of their kind of thinking when it comes to that mix of truth and order. One of the things I always say is you build a team, build a plan, deliver the project, but you've always got to build the team first to get a sense of who we are, what are we about. Forget what we've got to deliver to begin with. We can do that when we plan. And when you build a team, what you do is you make agreements about truth and order at that point. Now, I joke all the time that I was unpopular in my government jobs because I tried to make things too simple. Because public servants don't want things to be simple and easy to understand. They want it to be complex so they can demonstrate how smart they are. But Leonardo da Vinci, my mate Leonardo da Vinci, said that we often go out drinking. He said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And so I think, certainly projects and actually in organizations as well, you've got to find a really good balance between truth and order. There's got to be enough structure so people know which direction you're going in at any one time. And you've got to be able to tell them exactly what they need to know in order to help them on the way. And so I had this conversation recently when someone was talking about a restructure and they called it a secret project. And they got a secret project and they'd given it a crap name like, Project Nexus or whatever it was. Yeah. And it was like, it's terrible. I was like, what you overestimate there is the fact that people will find out. People will always find out about these things. You can still be honest about a restructure without giving away everything that you know. And the honesty there is we're having trouble financially, which means we're having to look at lots of different things, including how we're staffed. If you've got any suggestions, that would be great. We'd love to take those on board. I think when it comes to actually giving feedback, which is the other part of truth, which is often not talked about, is if you're a manager of any kind of seniority, it's your job to provide honest feedback in a way that generates motivation. And I think too many toxic cultures stem from the fact that managers don't know how to give honest feedback in a way that's motivating.
Well, I don't even have to ask the next question because how? Like, if, you're a manager listening to this podcast, this episode, you're going, absolutely spot on, Colin. I have no idea how to give feedback, particularly critical feedback to my staff. How do you go about doing it? Is it a one-on-one thing where it depends on the person you're talking to? Or is there sort of blanket tips and tricks that you can say, actually, I can apply this way of addressing it?
So I'll talk about the root cause and I'll give away how you do it, right? So the root cause is we don't train managers how to be managers. There's an expectation when you're given a position that you automatically know how to build a great team. You automatically know how to set expectations. You know how to give feedback. You know how to have courageous conversation. We don't. We fundamentally don't. We spend billions, kind of 16, 20 billion on these leadership programs where the special few people get to do something, but we don't train managers on how to be managers. The way to give feedback is to actually set expectations really clearly in the first place. So if you don't set expectations clearly, it's impossible. It's nigh on impossible to give motivational feedback because you're always going to say, that's not what you told me. You think about feedback that you've been given where you kind of reacted badly to it. And I can still think of some myself. It's because that the manager that I had didn't say, here's what I need from you to this level of quality by this date, and here's how I'll support you. And for me, kind of setting expectations is a real process. You have to think about what you're going to say before you say it. Often it's all done in the moment. Then you have to communicate it in their preferences. So it's very personal. Unless the team hasn't performed and you're going to direct it to the team, it's really personal. So I'm going to think, well, how does Dale like to receive communication? And it's definitely different to how Martin likes to receive. I can maybe be more direct to you, Dale, but maybe not so much with Martin. With you, I'm like, mate, here's something you have to get sorted. Whereas with Martin, here's one thing to think about, right? Because I want to make sure it's motivational. Then there's an opportunity for discussion where we actually talk about it so we can have a robust conversation about it. And then we can come to an agreement and we can confirm what needs to get done. How does it need to get done? By when? To what level of quality? And then at that point, as a manager, I can just check in, right? So if I've said this needs to be done by Friday, 5:00, I can check in with you Thursday morning and say, Dale, how you tracking, mate? Are you good? We're still okay for Friday? You'll go, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Or if you're not on track, I'm going, mate, we agreed Friday, 5:00. I've got something that I can recall, an agreement that we made. But most people don't do that.
Yeah.
Most managers don't do that. We don't teach them how to do it. And then consequently, feedback becomes really difficult and people end up chickening out by sending an email at 5 o'clock on a Friday.
Is that a training thing, or is it just a time pressure? Because it's not a new issue, is it? This has been going on since the dawn of time, yet we've still got projects delivered, we've still got stuff built. So it's not a new phenomenon, is it?
It's a training issue, Martin. And anybody can be taught these skills. We just don't put any kind of importance on it. So, I mean, you guys know me from way back when I first started working for myself in 2015-16, I wrote The Conscious Project Leader, which was all about these perceived soft skills. When I was a project manager in the late 1990s, long time ago, it was all about Prince 2. It was all about PMBOK. It's like, here's a book, learn this method, you'll be sound. Like, great, learning it in Liverpool. You'll be dead sound, just deliver it this way, lad. And actually I found when I became a project manager, I'd done the qualifications, but and PMBOK does some of it, but not that much of it. It's all about how do you get the best out of individuals who have got 10 other priorities that they're working on. How do we balance the work? How do we plan? I worked with an organization last week and I said, how do you know if you've got enough people to deliver your program? It's a mass multi-million-dollar program. She was like, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you mean? What do I mean? I was like, have you got any kind of workforce planning at all? Do you keep a spreadsheet with people's names and what they're working on? No. I was like, so how do you know you can deliver this? Well, we have to. And at that point, at some stage, they're going to break people. They're just going to be overworked because they haven't really thought ahead. Now, we were doing all of this stuff. I was doing it when I was working for Littlewoods in Liverpool in 2005. We were doing workforce planning for projects back then, and we're still not doing it in some companies now. So I think it's a skill that can be taught. And I would argue that it's a skill that managers are crying out for. I think people listening to this go, yeah, it would be great to go on a 2-day management. I call it management basics, right? And it's so popular because managers are like, I needed this 30 years ago. It's so simple. But managers are like, yeah, I want to know how to set expectations. I need to know how to create this conversation. I need to know how to present in person and virtually. Like there's an expectation that you know how to do all of this stuff when actually these are skills that we need to give people.
And you were chatting there about, delivering messages to different people. And is it because I'm South African, you're going to be direct with me?
Mm-hmm. Partly.
But how much does it play into, a lot of companies do sort of, they profile individual personalities with, DISC tests and, Myers-Briggs and insights and all these various ways to tell people how they are and what personality types they have. And yet I feel like a lot of the times that is an exercise that happens and then sort of gets parked there. We know what mix we have. We look at our diversity, and we spoke a lot about diversity of thought.
Yeah.
Is there different recipes or different formulas for the right mix of personality types for certain projects, organizations, or types of culture that you want to build? Because you talk about subcultures. If you have a sales team that's got a subculture within a large organization, you perhaps maybe want more reds in there because they're going to be out there and they're going to be big and all that type of thing, right? How do organizations get the right mix? Because all of a sudden you're going, well, I don't have any diversity in my sales team because they're all the same type of personality. So it almost contradicts each other. Is there a way to reconcile it, or is actually, there's no blueprint?
No, there is a way to reconcile it. And I love a personality. I'm a high extrovert, so I love a personality test. I love getting the report, reading it, and being like, it's almost like I've read it for the first time. What? I'm an extrovert? I didn't know this. I think the problem, I use them in my workshops, but the way that I use them is very different the way other people use them. Self-aware individuals are the building blocks of great teams. So what we want is highly emotionally intelligent people who can recognize how they feel, manage it, control it, and then use that information to build strong relationships with other people. When I did Myers-Briggs, I always use Myers-Briggs. There's nothing against Myers-Briggs. The way it was taught, they put you in a box and they say, you're ENTJ. I'm like, yeah, all right. I was when I answered the questions, right? That's what it came out as. Let's not fool ourselves. It's a computer algorithm that's actually giving me this report. It's like reading a horoscope, right? No disrespect to anybody who believes in this stuff. But when you read a horoscope, you make it fit. You're like, oh yeah, that happened to me. Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh, that was my day today. And so it is a little bit the same with personality. Obviously, there's way more science behind it, although it's contested. For me, though, right, so the greatest gain, it's been proven, the greatest gains you get in culture is through cognitive diversity. Mm-hmm. Different people from different backgrounds with different ideas and different thoughts. When I work with an engineering team, are people's personalities pretty similar? Pretty similar. Yeah, because the nature of the job requires someone who's very detail-oriented, right? Who's a deep thinker and actually isn't that great in social situations, except when they're with the other people who are like them.
Yeah.
The danger is you get groupthink. And so what you need to teach people, and this is what I teach people, is how to step into other personalities when they need to. And this is never taught, right? It's part of what I teach, when I work with teams, is how do you, if you're not like, I'm high yellow, let's use yellow as an extrovert, how do I be more blue? And so, the example I always give is when you write 7 books in 8 years, I can't do that as a high extrovert. Otherwise, they just read like children's books. I hope it doesn't sound like that on the audio book. Because it'd just be, oh, isn't it great? Oh, everyone should just build a team. I have to take myself away in a quiet space. I have to do lots of research. I have to think about how the information. But it's almost another state that I have to go into. It really freaks the kids out. They're like, why is Dad so quiet? It's because you assume another personality. You don't change who you are, but you assume another personality. Now, we do this in our personal lives all of the time with the partners that we have, with the relationships that we build. We call it empathy, right? Empathy is really understanding how the other person feels. And in order to do that, you've got to recognize their personality style and also when they're stressed or excited and how that looks, which is almost opposite to how they are. But we don't give people permission to do that in work. Instead, we make the personality profiling very, very individual. This is you, Martin. You're one of these. This is you, Dale. You're one of these. Colin, you're one of these. Right, talk about it. Which is fine to a point, but it never then generates the glue that is empathy, which then generates trust, which keeps people together, which creates vibrant cultures.
One of the things we did, myself, Martin, and Val, a while back when we all worked together, our team, our subculture, there were about 15 of us, I think, Martin.
25, I think.
25 even. We did it as a group. We did insights.
Yeah.
But we never left it in the boardroom or the room that we did this in. We actually brought it back and we put everyone's personality types on the org chart, and on the back it showed what those types of personalities looked like on a good day, a bad day. And so you could see, based on the interaction, how that person would receive information. And we actually put that on everyone's desks, even our stakeholders, the engineers, etc. And I think it went a long way to understanding the makeup of who we were and how individuals operate, but also collectively how we were as a team. And I think it really improved culture because all of a sudden, not only were you aware of you as an individual, but you as part of this team.
It actually had some of our main internal customers on there as well. And it just made you think before you send that email or you spoke to them if they were a yellow. It just made you think before you do it rather than just acting in your own profile. It was a really good concept, really good reminder.
It really allowed you to, as you said, that empathy. How will this person receive the message that I'm saying? And emails can be dangerous things, right? Because you type something in a sentiment that you think you're conveying.
Right.
Martin reads it, you read it, 2 totally different things. You, happy days, fantastic. Martin, why are you saying that and doing that, right?
Yeah.
So it's really dangerous. And so we need to be really careful, I think, of how we communicate. But I think what I want to do as well is, because you've written a number of books, and we're not here to sell books, although hopefully you sell millions. I want to know, because you've written quite a few books now over your time, what's different about what you've got in your latest book versus all the others?
So there's always been a progression with them. I always had it very, very clear in my mind, the books that I wanted to write. So let's take the culture books, I wrote Culture Fix in 2019, because at that time there wasn't a blueprint of what culture was and how to create it. There was lots of different things. There was Simon Sinek's Start With Why, which is very much about vision. You've got Brene Brown, who talks a lot about leadership. You've got Amy Edmondson, who talks about psychological safety. But there was no kind of, here's someone who's looked at all the cultures in the world and here's what they have in common. So I was like, here's what it is, right? When I wrote Culture Hacks, it was like, here's 26 ideas you can do to immediately instill some sense of camaraderie, of team into the way that you work. Hybrid Handbook was a reaction to COVID and say, okay, well, if you need to stand up a hybrid team, this is how you do it. This is how you factor all of the things that I've talked about in Culture Fix into hybrid. Whereas Detox Your Culture is very much about, here's some dumb things that companies around the world have done, very dumb things like the Colombian police dressed up in Nazi uniforms for a cultural event, just idiotic stuff. Don't do this. And here's what you need to do to kind of avoid the conditions for toxicity. And so I feel now with those 4 books, there's almost an anthology of culture, and I was saying to someone not so long ago in Birmingham, I said, what you've got there is this opportunity to go, okay, well, we can build, we understand now how to build. Because I always wanted to write how-to books. As a former manager myself, it used to piss me off, Dale, that I couldn't buy a book that told me how to do it.
Yeah.
People said, oh, don't write the how-to book. That's what you want people to hire you for. I'm like, that's the worst advice. Hopefully, if I write a good book, they'll hire me, which is, thankfully it's been proven. So I always wanted to write these kind of how-to books, these guides, that really helped people in the moment that they were in right now. So I think with the 4 books, certainly with culture, and I've written 3 on project management.
Yeah.
Here's the blueprint. It's up to you now to either go and do it. If you need help, you can bring me in and I can help you do it. Someone called me the anti-consultant recently. He's like, you just came in and gave away all of your knowledge. I was like, well, yeah, because I want you to do it. If you keep calling me back every year, one of us is doing it wrong. Either I'm not telling you the right stuff or you're just not taking action.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Consultants shouldn't be people you rely on forever.
That's right.
Right. Go in, make a difference. If you need me in the future for something different, give me a call. But if I'm in there turning a handle for you constantly, I'm probably not a consultant.
Well, the analogy I always use is if there's something wrong with you, you go to the doctor, right? And then they'll give you some advice and they'll give you a tablet and it sorts you out and you don't have to go back to the doctor and you feel great. Obviously, you have to keep going back to the doctor. Something's really, really wrong. Really wrong.
Change your doctor.
Yeah. Either change your doctor or change your lifestyle or whatever it might be. So, I always see myself as the person. I was talking to someone first thing this morning and they were like, so you'll teach yours. I was like, I've got a framework. I'll use the framework. I'll teach you the framework. We'll define the culture. You'll be set and you'll then know the framework. Yeah. And she said, and then what do we have? Regular check-ins? I'm like, if you want. If you feel you need a little bit of, if you want your tires pumping up, I'll come along with my pump.
Yeah.
But, let's see how we go. Yeah.
The world is so massive, right?
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
Giving away your secrets isn't going to, close the market to you, should we speak?
Well, let's hope not, Dale. I mean, if I'm asking to be on this podcast in the future and you're rejecting me, then maybe I've just exhausted everything I've needed.
We haven't signed anything. So, Well, we'd love to have you back as always, whenever you're in town. It's always good to see you face to face. Okay. So thank you for giving us the journey. And I think, it's fantastic that you've got this series of books and everyone can look through it. But one of the things you mentioned there was as a manager. Is it solely the manager's role? What part do employees have to play? To Martin's point, someone new joining a team, an organization, I always say that you have to constantly work on your team dynamic, your culture, because every time you introduce someone new, regardless if they've been in industry for 20, 30 years, or if they're just out of university, it changes the dynamic and it changes the culture of that team or organization. But what role does that person entering, or someone that's not in a managerial role necessarily, what role do they have to play when it comes to a non-toxic culture?
Yeah, so culture is everybody's responsibility, Dale. Everybody plays a role in culture. It doesn't matter whether you've been there 5 years or 50 years or 5 minutes. Everybody gets to play a role in culture. The manager's job is to make it a priority.
Okay.
The manager's job is to make time, get money, and do something every year. Where I made my name as a project manager was I spent a lot of time on building teams, which is obviously why I talk about culture now. And so I would take my teams away for 2 days at the start of every project. Now, when I say take them away, sometimes I took them away to a meeting room in the building, right? Obviously, the bigger the project, I remember one of the biggest things that I did was this multi-million-dollar thing in New Zealand. And we had a development team in India. The planning had gone really badly. And they approached me, they'd heard about me, and they said, listen, we want you to come in and build this team to deliver this business case to get government approval. And I was like, okay. And, I went through the process and said, okay, tell me what it is. And so we had a development team in India, we had a development team in New Zealand. And in total, there was about, 80 to 100 people. And I said, great, here's what it looks like. I was like, I need a week. I need a venue for a week. I need you to fly the Indian team in. I'm going to bring in someone to do personality profiling, but also only so we can talk about communication stuff. Email, by the way, statistically the worst form of communication. We want to do all of that. And then we're going to do that for 2 days. And then 3 days, all we're going to do is high-level planning. I just need a load of Post-it notes and a load of brown paper. Still the best way to plan, right? And I remember it was this chief information officer said, yeah. So he said, we're not going to do that. I was like, okay, best of luck. He's like, what? I was like, best of luck. It's like, either we do it properly, we do it once, we do it well, or we don't do it at all.
Yeah.
And, I really insisted on that. So in that instance, as a manager, it's my job to get the money, and I got the money, and it cost a lot of money to fly everyone from India. And I made it, I got the time. I said, right, I need to take everyone out for a week. But then I said to everybody at the start of the 5 days, you all have a responsibility to bring your best self every day. I know it's exciting that we're meeting together. No one gets to be hungover until Friday, right? So if you want to have a drink, great, it's 1. I need you front and center, 8:30 every morning. We've got so much to get through. We're going to build a team, then we'll have a celebration on Thursday. If you want to be hungover, it's Friday morning. We'll have a good laugh about it. I'll plan something fun, and then we'll get on with the actions that we need to take away. And so, that's the manager's job. And so few managers go into bat for culture.
Yeah.
They get told there isn't any money, and they go, okay, there isn't any money. It's like, you fight for it.
Fight for it, yeah.
Because your culture is the foundation for all success. So either you fight for it now, or you fight for it when the machine breaks. What do you want to do? Better to fight for it at the start.
Yeah. You mentioned in your book that cultures in some companies is managed by HR. It's just seen as a HR problem. The culture manager probably reports to the HR manager. Have you got any examples of where companies have just gone from this state to the state that you're talking about, where it's the managers who are driving the culture, it's the everyone, where it's kind of gone away from that HR department?
I've got a great example, Martin. And so these are my biggest clients. So Red Bull are my biggest client, right? And so about 3 years ago, so immediately post-COVID, they had a new CEO, and the CEO made culture his number one priority. Like straight away, I'm like, love this. Like if culture is your number one priority, you're going to be successful. And so I engaged with the global leadership team, but the global head of HR, great guy, based in Salzburg, said, culture's not mine. It's everybody's. We need a program to teach general managers in every country how to do culture for themselves. It's not mine. He's like, it's my job to create a program to teach them how to do it. It's my job to provide the tools so they can monitor so they develop their own internal tool, their engagement tool. And then I worked with the global learning and development team to develop a culture program. And they brought 100 people together from around the world in Austria for a week. We spent 2 days on culture. Everyone went back. The next month, they sold 1 billion cans, the most they'd ever sold. But that was a great example of where a HR manager understands their role. Now, I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for HR managers, because I feel like there are certain leadership teams that say culture is important, and it's not. And the HR manager has to do their level best to make it important, which is why you end up with a kind of bland, boring leadership development program when actually investing in culture would be better. And there are some HR managers who just are spineless, who have no backbone. And they don't go into culture, and they make excuses for senior leader behavior. And we've seen some of those play out in the media recently. And they just don't do the job that they're employed to do. Now, I want to make the point that some of them aren't allowed to do the job that I just want to make that point, because I've definitely met some of those. But I met one global HR director, and we had a good laugh about something. And I said, so, what's one thing in your profession you would change? He said, it's amazing to me how many people and culture directors don't understand culture. He said, can you imagine that happening in finance? I'm like, yeah. No.
Do you get qualifications for culture? Certifications?
You can do. And I spoke to a couple of people not so long ago who were studying it at university. But much like everything in university, it's not coalface culture. It's not the stuff that they can actually expect. And it's really important that you do industrial relations and negotiation techniques and all of these kinds of things. But often HR tends to be policy, process driven. And they'll say it's about the people, but then they don't actually. I'll give you another example. Sorry, I'm going off at a tangent here. So I worked with a company in Canberra in Australia, and the HR manager was awesome. So the CEO said, I want to change the culture. And she was like, okay, great. I'm going to need $1 million. And he just laughed. He was like, no chance. She was like, this is a 2,000 person company. We've got people all over the place. We need to bring them all together. We need to bring somebody in. And she'd seen me speak at a conference and heard about stuff. She was like, it needs to be $1 million. And this was for all the other stuff. And she eventually got 800,000.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, because she built a case to change the culture. And of course, engagement went up. The worst performing team, their engagement went up 30% in 3 months. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, customer service rates rocketed, reputation rocketed, CEO's reputation rocketed. And he was just like, we've really turned it around. It's like, mate, all you did was provide the money. But sometimes that's all you need.
So you mentioned measurement of culture there, and a lot of companies will do their annual engagement survey or 6 monthly. What is it that the good companies do there? Like, can you have too few or too many data points? Like, what's a good balance to have when you really want to get a sense of where the mood is at amongst the employees?
The biggest measure of your culture is the results that you achieve. If you're not achieving the results, then you haven't got the right culture. Plain and simple. Everyone measures their culture through the engagement survey, Martin, and they'll have a look at a score. Now there are two elements to culture on a day-to-day basis. There's how emotionally intelligent people are and how engaged they are in their work. And by engaged, it's like, how much do you care? How much do you care about the work that you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis? When people don't care and they have low emotional intelligence, you get a stagnant culture. And stagnant cultures are awful. And generally, the engagement score for those is about 20 to 40%. Less than 20, it's toxic. Right? I've only worked with one of those. It was 19% who were awful. And the CEO was the problem. Pleasant cultures are where engagement is low, but emotional intelligence is high. So isn't it great? We all love each other. Isn't this brilliant? We've got blind optimism, but we just don't care enough to actually hit our deadlines. We're copying people into emails. Everybody gets invited to meetings. Isn't it lovely? Not really if we're not achieving targets. So that's a pleasant culture. Generally, pleasant cultures between 40 to 60% engagement score. High engagement, low emotional intelligence is combatant cultures. Everything's a fight. Everything's a battle. Right? People, lots of anxiety, lots of stress. People feel overworked. Lots of people telling you how many hours they're working and how many emails they've got. There's ghosting all over the place, emails and phone calls. So the engagement score there is usually between 60 to 75. High engagement, high emotional intelligence. This is where cultures actually take the time to define the culture. Remember, you get the culture you choose to define. There's feedback. There's celebration of success. There's honest conversations. And we're continually evolving the culture. If your score is 75% and above, you've got a vibrant culture, right? And at that point, what you've got to do is work really, really hard to stay there.
And how often would you manage that? Say in a big company, 10,000 employees plus. Yeah. What frequency would you be recommending?
Yeah, so I do an all of company, and Cisco are really good at this. Cisco, a client of mine, they measure all of company once a year, but they'll do pulse checks in different areas, just selected at random. Also, what they don't do is ask the same people all of the time for feedback, because what you get then is kind of survey fatigue, and people are like, oh God, not this again. Also, 3 questions, like not 30 questions. Okay. If you make the survey hard, by the start, you're like, oh yeah, I'll answer the survey. By the 30th question, you're like, I hate working because this is nonsense. So keep it simple. I always, again, using the medical analogy, it's like a health check. You might do a big health check maybe once a year, certainly when you're my age, once a year. But then if something crops up, you might just pop in and get it checked out. So, I always think little and often is best. Yeah.
Do you find the best way is anonymous surveys, or would you expect more sort of indirect feedback, or is it just the best way to measure it is just completely anonymous and track it?
Yeah, so vibrant cultures, what they do is the managers look for feedback almost every week, and they're either giving and receiving feedback. So they're always monitoring what can we do to improve, what can we do to improve, and at that, vibrant culture managers have got the skills to be able to do that. Anonymous is fine if people don't feel safe to provide feedback, which often happens in combatant, stagnant cultures, so low EQ. Ideally, what you want is for people to feel safe enough to just say, this is a bit shit and we should fix it. Even better is if you've got a culture where they feel empowered. They feel empowered to be able to do it themselves. That classic, we'll ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah.
And the great cultures have that because they actually make time for creativity.
Nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love listening to your anecdotes there. The one in New Zealand got me thinking, was that perhaps around the time when they lost the World Cup? But we won't go down that route.
Don't go down that route. Don't go down that route. Just in case we piss off any New Zealanders listening. They'll be like, we didn't lose the World Cup still.
But if Val was here, dear old Val, we haven't forgotten about you, Val. He'd probably want to ask you along the lines of, a lot of talk is around AI at the moment.
Yeah.
AI for cultures, opportunity or threat?
Both. But that shouldn't dent people's curiosity. I think, employees aren't stupid. Organizations are looking to use AI either to save money or make money. Generally, they'll be the two things, and we've already had some companies who are, kind of shedding jobs and letting AI do it. The way that technology evolves, AI is just going to probably be a bit shit for the first year in the workplace. Organizations will try and force people to use Copilot and tools like the Gemini and all this kind of stuff. And then it will normalize. I think it will, I think, and I did some research for Detox Your Culture. I think it will significantly impact workplace cultures. I just don't know that we know exactly what that looks like at the minute. I found that there are some companies using AI to hire, and I think that's a mistake. I think that you might use it as a filtering tool to ascertain people's technical skills, but certainly not their emotional skills, because that's the values match, the culture fit we talk about. But, I think as soon as employees recognize that feeding information into a machine might ultimately lead to them losing their job, I think they'll get wise to that and stop feeding the machine. That advice is for my brother, who loves Copilot. I'm like, stop telling it everything you know. It's going to take your job in a year. So I think for me, even for me in my job, I'm curious about how we will use it. I'm monitoring how it evolves. But for me, I don't use it in any way other than, kind of to provide a little snippet of something that I might not have full knowledge of,
Yeah. I'm going to be controversial and go, actually, you know what? I don't mind if AI did some of my job or maybe even all of it, because there'll always be something else to do as well. Well, let's face it, if it does all of our jobs, we can all just go to the beach, sip on pina coladas. Wouldn't that be great?
But the thing I always say, because I got this question not so long ago. I was like, we don't even know how to use email properly. Like people are still going, got 100 emails. Like, why? Stop sending them. Stop copying people in.
It wouldn't be great if your AI and my AI emailed each other and then we wouldn't have to worry about email.
Yeah, that's great. They had a relationship that we started to worry about. I was like, what are those guys doing?
But no, it's great. I think, technology is here to stay. And I think, as you say, be curious, but be careful. We've said it before on the podcast. I think we have to roll with the times as well. We have to be vigilant and understand how that will shape and impact the cultures that we have and that we want to set. And if we see that as an opportunity, but be mindful that there potentially are some threats, I think we'll navigate through this phase. But look, we are heading towards the end of the podcast. I want to open it to the live audience because I don't know if there have been any questions that you want us to ask on your behalf, but do we have any?
God, I'm putting you on the spot.
I see shakes of heads, listeners.
It's because we covered the subject matter so comprehensively.
Very interesting. So we got very interesting from a live audience.
They're all scared of the boss who's created such a bad culture.
So just for the listeners, the question was, if you do figure out there is toxicity, where do you begin?
I think most companies don't have much in the way of toxicity as much as they have dysfunction. The approach is different for the two. Most of the organizations that I work with either want to maintain their sense of vibrancy. So Red Bull would definitely fit into that category. That, they really want to stay the best at what they do. Everyone else is dysfunctional. I think for dysfunction, what you need to do is bring people together, and face-to-face is still the best way to reset culture. And now, if you're a large organization, you might, and I've worked with many of these, we might do it at a subculture level. We might agree a new set of values. For toxic cultures, you have to cut out the toxicity. Usually one person, you mentioned the cancer, one person is a cancer. And what doctors don't do is go, let's leave it in there, see what happens. They go, right, let's get that out. Here's the treatment plan. And the same is true with toxic cultures. I refused to work with one organization because they wouldn't remove a person who had been found to have verbally abused and bullied 3 members of staff.
Wow.
And they made that person head of special projects or some BS title that they do, because it would have cost them a fortune to pay him off. I'm like, but the cost to your culture is huge. And I said, you'll never be able to change the culture until that person leaves.
Yeah.
Right? And so that was the only one I've refused to work with. Everybody else, what you have to do is you have to, there's almost like a sense of, there has to be a pause. Mm-hmm. I think that, there's often heavy cultural trauma in toxic cultures. So that has to be given time to kind of work its way out. And often I'll help with that process, get people talking openly about how they felt, what they would like to see differently. So dysfunction, you can just bring everyone together for a couple of days, literally reset in line with values or vision or purpose, and just give everyone that sense of, yes, we're back together. Let's do this every year. For toxic cultures, probably takes a little bit longer. I've one toxic culture that I work with them for 18 months. And at the end of that 18 months, they were just about through it. That's how long it took. But often people will say, how long does it take to change a culture? It can take 3 months. If the will is strong and people are determined, it can take 3 months. Toxic cultures, 18 to 24 months easily, but it will require change at the top because those people presided over the conditions that caused it in the first place.
I love your analogy around GPs, right? Because
I don't know why that suddenly cropped up and used it all.
It's fantastic because it's, if you do feel like there's something wrong, if you got a lump somewhere or something like that, you go and get it checked out by a specialist.
Right. And
I think it's no different here, where if you feel there's potentially some toxicity, go get it checked out by the specialist, right? So yeah. Any more from the audience?
If you're an employee who loves their job, but the culture's wrong, how do you go address it if management don't realise there's a cultural issue?
Great question. So for the listeners, if you're an employee and you realise the culture is wrong, how do you approach it if your management doesn't realise that it's wrong? And you love your job. So you love your job, but you realise there's a problem. How do you approach it?
So what the American motivational speakers will tell you is, hey, man, just go and get another job. Like, it's so easy to do. Like, they all do it and people like it on LinkedIn. Oh, this is genius. Like, it's just not possible for most people, especially if they love their job. They don't want to bail. Often you've invested time, emotional energy into, for the advice that I always give is, if you can, talk to your manager. If it feels safe enough to talk to your manager, don't do it in a confrontational way. Talk about how it's affecting either the morale of the team or the value of the work that you do, or how you personally feel. I like to think that, no one wants to come to work to be the worst version of themselves. No one's getting up in the morning going, today I'm going to be a real idiot and make everyone's life hell. I mean, there might be one or two people. But I think sometimes people just aren't aware of how their style might affect other people. And I think, there also has to be this realization that just because you like information in one particular way doesn't mean it's always going to come in that way. But actually, if it's making you feel anxious, it makes you feel stressed, then you need to have a conversation. If you don't feel safe enough to talk to your manager, you need to go above them. And at that stage, it feels risky because you're like, I'm kind of dobbing my manager in. But if it's not safe to talk to them, then what else are you going to do? And you love your job and you don't want to leave. The other thing I would suggest, but I don't often suggest this, is if there's another employee you can talk to, just don't make it gossip. Don't make it like, oh God, isn't Colin an idiot? He makes me feel, he makes me feel.
Even
like
if
that
he is, right?
Yeah, even if he is. Just don't gossip, because that's you being the worst version of yourself. And then you'll be like, oh, it's making me be the kind of person that I don't want to be. So talk to your manager, talk to the person above. If you love your job but you don't want to leave the company, find a secondment opportunity. I spoke to someone recently who'd read that in a book. I can't even remember writing it, but she said, I love that suggestion. And she found a secondment within the company. She said, I've never been happy. I'm doing something different. But don't just quit without saying something. If you genuinely love your job, then give it a go. I always think that leaving should be the last thing that you do. But if you've got no other alternative, then, and you can, then
quiet quitting is actually a real thing these days.
Yeah, well, quiet quitting, it's really interesting, that one, Dale, because quiet quitting was people saying no to longer hours. So it's a cultural thing, right? And then they were putting it all over TikTok. That's where it started. So obviously it's a thing if it's on TikTok. For me, the best cultures in the world, no one's quiet quitting because they don't overwork their people. Just like, the right to disconnect laws. I think it's a massive mistake for government to legislate organizations. And I think employees should be made aware through Glassdoor or whatever of the companies that overwork their employees. And that's what's going to happen. Gen Z employees are going to start talking about these companies, and they just won't be able to employ the top talent. Talent will go to the organizations that give them enough work so that they feel they're contributing and growing, but not too much work where they feel burnt out and they have no time for themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any more from the audience? I see shakes of heads, but some fantastic, challenging questions there. Martin, do we have Fiverr or anything ready for Colin? We've given you Fiverr before with these quick fire questions, but I think we left Machine Gun Martin out. We've got some challenging questions from the audience, which was great. It's the first live audience we've had, so it's a great tip.
It's great. Yeah.
Maybe next time we'll have a mic for them, so I don't have to repeat the questions. But lessons learned and all. Look, Colin, it's absolutely amazing to have you back. As we say, we always love having you here. You always push the boundaries of how we think about cultures. You give everything that you've got as well freely, which we really appreciate as well. Those that listen to this podcast know it's all about sharing and paying it forward. And so we truly thank you for that. But before we let you go, any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with? Well,
I mentioned before, Dale, that people have agency over their culture. And, I just want it to be clear that you can be involved in creating the kind of culture that you want to be part of. I haven't met a manager yet who said, oh no, we don't want people to actually get involved. We just want people to be passive. They may think that. So managers, you have agency over it. Culture is everybody's responsibility, and you get the culture that you choose to build. So choose to build something that's safe, has belonging, is value-based, and ultimately gets the job done.
Amazing. And we could mic drop on that. But no, it is Thursday, so we can have the hangover tomorrow. So we'll go for a few drinks as well. It's rare. Well, you'll be here more often, I hear. So, but it's rare that you are here to date. So we'll go have a few drinks.
Any final thoughts from you, Dale?
From me, I think particularly with cultures, it's never a straightforward. Here's a blueprint. And I think to Colin's point, you've got to understand the type of culture you want, how your goals fit in, so how that culture drives your goals. And then you have to navigate that and have to learn, one, where your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you have some weaknesses and trying to build the culture you want, you need to educate yourself, upskill yourself, especially if you're in that leadership role. I think it's a constantly evolving thing that you have to constantly upskill yourself, and people like Colin that have, the knowledge, the experience to share with everything, are amazing resources. So yeah, it's one of those that we should always talk about. And whilst we've had you on, a few times talking about culture, Colin, I think it's great that we remind people that, this podcast isn't all about AI or project controls or risk management or the critical path, right? We work together in project teams and organizations, and that has a culture, and it's highly, highly important that you have the right one. So those are my thoughts. Thanks for asking.
That's a mic drop there too.
Yeah.
But anyway, on that note, folks, that is the end of this episode. So thank you very much for joining us. But remember, if you like what you heard, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Colin D Ellis. And thank you all for listening. Until next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Martin, it's bye for now.